Good evening and good day. Welcome to lecture number 24. Today we will talk about problems with incorrect hoof form and bone alignment, laminitis and founder. The picture here is of Alexander Nevzorov from Russia. I think I have great respect for this man. He has really put interacting with horses in a whole new perspective, and I really like what he's doing and how he's influencing people and getting people to think about what they are doing with horses. He's a bit outspoken, and that is maybe a good thing. So just always trying to share something with you that is relevant to what I'm doing here, what we are doing as a school, and so on. So, to talk about incorrect bone alignment, incorrect hoof form. Any deviation from the normal harmonic alignment of the bones in the equine limb does not only impact the health of the hoof, but the health of the limb and the entire organism. It is not just the hoof, it is not just the leg, there is much more to it. And when we talk about the harmonic curve, it goes through the bones that are outlined in black, this way. A reduction in shock absorption leads to stress in joints as well as in all the areas where ligaments attach to bone. If this situation persists, inflammation will lead eventually to ossifications in these areas. We have talked about this already. Since the entire equine organism functions as a large safety net for all smaller problems, these unphysiological changes often only become really apparent after months, sometimes years. Joint cartilage is also under pressure from reduced shock absorption. Often chips in the joints are the results. Fractures of the sesamoid bones and inflammation of the fetlock joint are also a result of this. One of the problems that becomes right away apparent is the imbalance between extensor and flexor tendon. As the one or the other gets out of balance, the musculature has to adapt to the new situation in order to keep the tension on the tendon. Joints and ligaments have to adapt as well. So when the heel becomes higher, this amount here that's marked with X is the amount that the flexor tendon has to be pulled up. And you see that when the heel gets higher, that's the red outline here, and it gets this much higher, then we have this much difference in the tendon, and the whole alignment when the heel gets high gets further this forward. And that results in a steeper pastern and therefore in less shock absorption. Now when I take all my lines out of here, maybe you can see it a little bit better. I can see it better when I sit a little bit back from the monitor, which I usually do not do. When high heels force the musculature to pull the tendon tight and therefore upwards, remember this here is the tendon, the blue double line, all the ligaments and fibrous connections in the leg are pulled up as well. When this situation is further stressed through a sudden impact, like a jump or a real good big buck, fractures of the splint bones are often the result. Either the connection between splint bone and cannon bone is severed, and that's up here, actually this part, or the lower part of the splint bone is fractured, and that is down here. High heels lead to heel pain. The frontal area of the hoof receives more pressure. As a result, the toe grows slower and the heel grows even faster, furthering the imbalance in the hoof. This becomes very apparent when you watch the growth rings around the hoof capsule. So this is such a hoof with a very upright pastern, high heels, and trust me, I always say you can't tell from a picture, but this was a horse that I had in my care, so I know how high this heel was. And then you have a growth ring here that you can really see. And when you take the distance from here to here, how much this heel has grown, and you look here how much that toe has grown, this is not the even growth or even wear that we're looking for when we were talking about a balanced hoof capsule. And this balanced hoof capsule, it doesn't seem that a lot of hoof schools, farrier schools, hoof schools, barefoot schools talk about this. Everybody talks about mediolateral balance, right to left, but talking about interior-posterior balance, front to back, which is even more important than the mediolateral balance. So not too many talk about this, and you see that the hairline flattens out here, even so that picture is taken a little bit too far from the front. The hairline flattens out regardless, even if you take it a little bit more from the side. And every time the hairline flattens out like this, you have a problem. And there is too much pressure on the toe and not enough pressure on the heel, because this horse is overloading the toe in order to escape heel pain. In hoofs with high heels, the unphysiological placement of the coffin bone pushes the lateral cartilage up. The Palmer process pushes the lateral cartilage out of the hoof capsule. So when you have, this is a picture that we had last time when we talked about the clubfoot. We have a coffin bone that is out of alignment. It's not ground parallel. And so the Palmer process pushes that lateral cartilage here up. And it looks then like this. Now, it also could be that a very high bar pushes that lateral cartilage up. But what you have here in this hoof is you have at the same time a flat hairline. And when you have that, you kind of sort of know that you have a Palmer process that doesn't belong to a ground parallel coffin bone. You also see that this here kind of flares away, and that doesn't bode well for, I just want you to see how this lateral cartilage is really pushed up here. High heels and unphysiological coffin bone placement will eventually lead to the rotation of the coffin bone away from the hoof wall, and this we name founder. Rotation with separation. What we talked last time about, clubfoot, coonfoot, extensor bearing foot, those all were rotation without separation, where the coffin bone was still tightly attached to the hoof wall, but not in alignment anymore with, but not ground parallel. That is rotation. When it detaches from the hoof wall, that is rotation with separation, also known as founder. So let's talk about recognizing bone alignment without a radiograph. How can we see that? That doesn't mean I don't want radiographs. I'm a big fan of radiographs, and the more I trim, the more I want to see radiographs. It really helps in assessing what to do with a hoof. So the first way we can assess that a hoof does not have, a leg does not have the correct bone alignment is with high heels. And what does that mean? A heel is high. It means the heel is higher than 3 centimeters on an average sized horse measured from the hairline, or 3.5 centimeters measured from where the lateral cartilage dips into the hoof capsule. And I know you all, after we talked about this in one lecture, you all went out and checked that and practiced this, where this is. The other thing you can see in this hoof again is how immensely upright the pastern is. That gives away how the coffin bone is positioned in the hoof capsule. It does not talk about separation. It's not what we're saying. But you have a coffin bone here. I have to take this away. You have a coffin bone here that definitely is not ground parallel. More like this. If a hoof does not have a 30-degree hairline, here you have on the right front, it looks as if you have maybe 5 to 8 degrees. And here, I don't know, this looks ground parallel, 1 to 2 degrees instead of 30. And again, very upright pasterns. And these are most likely front feet, so not a good situation. If a hoof has too steep a toe line, this is a front hoof, and this is by no means, nowhere, 45 degrees. This is more like 60. Yeah. But again, you have a very shallow hairline and an upright pastern. They all seem to fit together. And finally, when you have a bulge here, right above the hairline, you have this hairline here that kind of curls around, that isn't straight by any stretch of imagination. So that in itself gives something away. And then you have a bulge here. And because the P2 is pushing on the Palmer process and has pushed a lot forward here already. So these are the telltale signs without radiographs, how we can see if the horse does not have correct bone alignment. So let's talk a little bit about laminitis. There is a disconnect when people talk about laminitis, and they use laminitis and founder interchangeably. And basically, laminitis is only the inflammation of the lamellae. There's nothing said about rotation, there's nothing said about separation, it's just the inflammation of the lamellae. And this here, what you see, is a very laminitic horse. this actually was a very founded horse. You can see the typical founder stands with the legs far pushed under the hind legs to take weight off the front, and he was just hopping around with these on these front legs, and he tries to get the weight off of the front where the pain is in his hoof, and you can see in his face that he's really, really miserable, and you also can see it in his body. Like this line here speaks of tension. Here we have tension. We have definitely here a lot of tension. The eye doesn't look too good either, and the tail doesn't look good. Sorry, I got ahead of myself here. The horse's weight with each step is equally distributed onto the laminae. Horses live with this for 30 to 40 years even in rocky areas. If anything like a metabolic disorder occurs, such as an excess in protein, vaccinations or other toxins, the overloaded area becomes inflamed. Horses show pain and shift their weight rearward onto parts of the hoof where the laminae are still intact. Seen from a pathophysiological point of view, inflammation is a functional measure for repair. Through increased blood flow, metabolism, the exchange of waste products for nutrients and oxygen, is intensified. Inflammation causes pain but has a function, and suppressing it, as with anti-inflammatories, prevents this natural healing mechanism from working. The suppression of inflammation is usually done through medication and/or wedge pads. Metabolism diminishes and healing becomes slow, if not impossible, since healing requires increased metabolism. Many horses with acute laminitis can be healed exclusively by lowering the palmar processes, bringing the hoof, and as such the coffin bone, back in its original position through trimming, and optimizing blood flow through the foot with movement. After removing the cause, which is overload of the coffin bone, it takes about 2 to 8 weeks depending on the stage of the disease at the beginning. After 3 to 5 months, as soon as 75% of the coffin bone is tightly connected again, and the horse is usually able to move pain-free. So much about laminitis. If you just have inflammation and the horse has a laminitic episode and you bring the hoof back into its physiologically correct form and move the horse carefully, not with beating him forward, but you move him as much as you can, he will walk himself out of the laminitis. And certainly such a horse should be outside. If the horse does not move, the blood pools in the hoof, gets thick, and does not get pushed out anymore, and therefore becomes stagnant, and that is very, very hard on the horse and very painful. And then you hardly can get him out of a stall anymore. So leaving a horse like this outside all the time is really the way to go. So, question, how does founder occur? How does this rotation happen? If you remember the anatomy sessions, there was no room in the hoof for the coffin bone to rotate. And how can it possibly rotate from one day to the next and move from where it was here to there, where it is now? How in the world does this happen if there is no room? Where did the room come from? So this is what we name the progression of rotation. And this progression of rotation is a very slow process. It is not something that happens overnight. We start out with a tight connection, and this is the picture you have here, a sagittal cut through a fairly healthy hoof. You have an extensor process here, almost as high as the hoof capsule. So that looks pretty good. You have a pretty tight connection here, all around, all through. So that looks good too. And the horse has a low heel. So now, for one reason or another, the frontal laminar connection is compromised and challenged with a steep bone alignment, which means high heels. This here is a hoof with high heels. So what happens, because it's overloaded in the front, is the lamellae start to stretch. And they cannot, so this here becomes a little wider. And they cannot regain their original tightness because the pressure is always there. Heel is still high. Every step there is pressure on those lamellae that is unphysiological. So with this stretching, the coffin bone makes a little bit more contact with the sole. And it puts pressure here on the solar corium. With this pressure, the bone cannot deal with that. So there is a little bit bone removed. Not a lot, just a little bit. And that little bit is enough for the lamellae now to stretch even more than before. And this situation gets worse. And so a little bit more bone is removed. And we still have the high heel situation. And we can see how that bone in here in the process of this becomes rounded down here. Becomes a little bit rounded. So that is already removed bone. Now with that situation there is a little bit more space again. And this space enables the coffin bone to sink further, and at the same time it pinches the circumflex artery shut. The same circumflex artery that nourishes the solar corium, supplies it with blood, and allows the solar corium to produce horn. Because that's what the solar corium does. It produces horn. So if the circumflex artery is pinched shut, then there is insufficient soul production. And we are now having a little indentation in which the coffin bone can sink. And that after a long time, that little indentation shows up in part as a hole right inside the white line. And this is because the sole grows forward and down, and by the time you see it, it has grown all the way to the front. From about here where this all happened. So now the coffin bone has once again some space and will sink further. In the sinking situation, the sole corium is pushed together even more. And that leads to less sole production. And that progression of rotation continues. And it gets worse and worse and worse. Meanwhile, we have no real connection up here anymore. And you see now that this here is wider than here and wider than here. And the connection all around is toast. As a result of the inferior hoof production, the white line the sole is pushed together, not only from the outside but also from the inside. So, and then you see this kind of bruising here, which is also a sign of rotation. Since the coffin bone is now, after years of this, more or less standing on the sole instead of being tightly suspended by the lamellae, the pressure on the sole corium leads to less sole production and bruising. The coffin bone has more room, the tip slides more down and back, pushing the coffin joint more and more forward. And this is what happens up here. As the tip goes this way, the extensor process goes this way. And remember, we talked about how you can see this from the outside when you have that bulge. That is what's happening. That extensor process moves forward and you see the bulge on the coronet, just above the coronet band. So the coffin bone rotates away from the wall. But this is not a process that happens right away. So here you have a radiograph of a really founded hoof with really problems. Not only is the coffin bone no longer ground parallel, it also has started to remodel here and try to have a new ground surface, since this bone alignment is not coming right with these high heels and the constant pressure. So now the coffin bone tries to fix something here, and it wears away here and eventually will be ground parallel like this. Now when I take all these lines away, you also see something here that's named a ski tip. And this is where the circumference, the distal border of the coffin bone, is worn so thin and has so remodeled that when you boil a bone like this out, you can actually break this off with your fingers. The bone is so brittle in the front. And this also has sunk significantly down. So this is a very difficult situation. Here you can see that bulge again that we talked about. And you see how this happens through this all pushing, this here pushing forward with every step and pushing on the extensor process. And every time this pushes here, actually here, that pushes this further back. So without lowering that heel, you will not get anywhere with a horse like that. Here we have a sagittal cut through such a bone, through such a hoof, and you see that the coffin bone has sunk, and this is the outline of the bone. It has significantly remodeled. If you trim this back, this all is laminar wedge, and trimming this back is really important, but you have to have in this case it's really good to have radiographs so you know exactly where to trim it back to and don't go too far. And then you certainly have to lower that heel. That's more important than anything. And we will talk about trim considerations next time. This is not something that's part of the lecture this time. We have a few other things to discuss today. If the horse is short or with advanced contraction, we had established in the contraction lecture that can be just as detrimental to the hoof health. Advanced contraction can be just as detrimental to the hoof health as shoeing can be. If the horse is short or with advanced contraction, the vaulted sole does not flex upon weight bearing. The coffin bone can only rotate slowly through the lack of sole growth under the tip of the coffin bone. As soon as the solar vault can flex through correct trimming, the coffin bone will rotate immediately because now it has the room, because now things are moving again. In this position, the tip of the coffin bone has even more pressure and therefore bone substance will diminish. So it is really, really important that when you have a situation where you expect a compromised laminar attachment, that you do not open this hoof up and give it all the movement you can possibly give it. The development happens over many years, depending on how steep the hoof is, how much it deviates from the 30-degree hairline position, how much the horse moves and on which terrain he moves. If the terrain is concussive or non-concussive makes a big difference. The stretching of the lamellae is often connected with bruising and wound secretion. When trimming, you see then a red line instead of a white line. Where the white line is, there is red. So this here, what you see here, is a foundered horse that I had in the clinic, and he came to me with the hoof on the left top, this one here. He has an Epona plastic shoe on. That is this Farrier's idea of dealing with foundered horses. This is his hairline, and well, what you see is what you get. So before I took this horse in, I trimmed. He wasn't far away from me. I trimmed him. No, I took the shoes off the hind feet and detoxed him the first time. 2 weeks later, I came back and trimmed the hind feet. And then another 2 weeks later, he came to the clinic to get the front feet of shoes off, because I really didn't want to deal with this at the farm where he was. I wanted him on rubber. I had seen, no, I didn't see x-rays. I have seen that hoof form, and that made me really cringe. So he came to me and made these pictures and trimmed him, not to what you see here. This is a picture how he looked 2 or 3 days later. The hairline had straightened out. The heel is still a little high. I did not trim him super aggressively. But he was a busybody. He really, really moved. He wanted to move. He was constantly going somewhere, and I had a pretty big herd at the time. They didn't leave him alone either, so they pushed him around, and so he had to move. And what had happened was I had trimmed the heel down, but the heel also widened, and everything straightened out. This was pretty amazing. And I made a picture of before I trimmed him, and then I have another one after I trimmed him again. So this horse had a multitude of other problems than rotation and separation. And this actually is his X-ray that was made after I had him already for 5-6 days. The vet couldn't make the X-ray before. So we have now an almost ground parallel coffin bone, and we have actually something that could resemble a connection here. Could, not sure. But we also have this here is a wire that's put around his hairline. So what you see here is tremendous sinking in this case, and that was already in place before, I'm pretty sure. However, this horse never took a lame step. He was a little bit shorter in the beginning, but as the heels came down, he got longer and longer, and the sunk situation did not seem to make a big impact on him. He has a little bit of remodeled ski tip here, just a tiny little bit. You can see how it flares out a little bit, it's a little thin. This is one of those coffin bones that is sharp on the bottom edge, on the distal edge, because it is worn away. This is not anymore a full coffin bone from being sunk. He also had tremendous amount of medial-lateral imbalance that was actually way worse than this here. This was pretty crooked little horse. So when you have incorrect bone alignment and rotation with separation, and you have this pressure here, again you can see that bulge here a little bit, you have that pressure on the frontal part of the hoof. You see how that presses the horn together, and in the sides, in the lateral areas, you have all these waves. This is how actually the lamellae run under the horn. Exactly the same way in all these waves. And when the coffin bone rotates out of its ground parallel position, it takes the lateral regions with it and really wreaks havoc on them. Even if they are still attached, it just bends everything. And these are all things that you have to take into consideration when you rehabilitate a horse like this. Separation of the coffin bone does not necessarily happen symmetrically. Depending on the forces in the hoof, the one or the other side may be more compromised. You see how this is here much higher? This coffin bone was not only rotated, and it was severely rotated. It also was rotated laterally. So this one here fortunately wasn't mine. This is a nightmare hoof. There's everything in this hoof that I don't want to see in a client's horse. Coronet contraction. Inside the vertical, huge ring bone. Who knows how these joints function? Most likely total encrusting of the coffin joint and the short pastern joint, and the pastern joint. So really a difficult situation to trim, but you never know in this profession what you get called to. And the more you have you get a reputation that you really can fix things, the more complicated it gets. It seems that you never work out of that. It seems that it's never easy. The better you get, the more complicated the horses get that you are presented with. A tightly shod horse will not have sufficient blood circulation to the laminar connection and the solar corium to feel pain. The owner may not notice that the horse is lame, as he is not lame in the conventional way, bobbing his head, but rather short on both front hoofs. Nobody suspects a problem. Other signs of pain, tight nostrils, tight mouth, muscle cramping in shoulder and forearm area, are often not recognized. Thus the horse owner is often surprised when his horse is all of a sudden founded. This happened exactly in this horse that was presented to me May 1st, 2004. I was in the last stages of my education to become a hoof care provider. I had 2 more months to go, and this horse came to me, and he was fine one day, and the next day he couldn't move, and they called the veterinarian, and the veterinarian diagnosed on the right front that you see here 28 degrees rotation, and on the left front 24 degrees rotation. I was really excited about this horse because I thought, oh, now I can put everything in place that I learned, and I trimmed him, and he did come with the coffin bone through the sole. He went down. He was it took him 2 weeks, and then he went down for 2 weeks and did only get up to relieve himself. Today I know this is unnecessary. I would not take a horse like this out of shoes right away. I would detox him first. I would stabilize him first with good nutrition. Or if I would take the shoes off, I would put him immediately in boots and pads to support the whole structure, or maybe even cast him. Things like this, but I wouldn't just take the knife and trim him down anymore. However, this horse was a busybody, and he was really intent on living. He's still alive, and wanted to move in the worst way, and that actually pulled it out, and it took 8 months, and he was back on the saddle. He was ridden and totally lameness free, and actually a beautiful mover. So what do you know? Dr. Rudolf Sirold, a veterinarian at the University of Leipzig in Germany, did extensive research about the laminar connection in short horses and came to the conclusion that in short horses the destruction of the laminar corium is very comparable to the Raynaud syndrome so often seen in humans. Dentists have this from holding the drill. Chainsaw operators, sledgehammer operators have this. They do not feel their hands anymore, and actually the fine capillaries are destroyed through vibrations from the end. So, and the more the capillaries are destroyed, the less nerve function there is, because where there's no blood, there is no nerve function. And he compared this, the vibrations from the shoeing, to this human problem. In horses who show no lameness, the capillaries in the lamellar connection are destroyed through the vibration of the shoe. This in return leads to destruction of the lamellae. And what we have here is on the left side top we have pretty good looking lamellae, except for this little area right here. That doesn't look so good, but everything else is nice and tight. And then in opposition to this, we have here on the bottom this very destroyed laminar connection. And you only can see this when it's too late, when you have already no hose attached to this hoof anymore. So as the sole grows forward and down, we have here a normal connection and a tight white line down here. And then this hoof starts to rotate. The hoof doesn't rotate. The coffin bone starts to rotate, and the white line gets wider with that. But as the sole grows forward and down, it often hides that problem. And you have, once again, after a while, a tight white line, but you still have rotation and separation. So the white line does not always give it away. That's what we're trying to demonstrate here. It also may happen in a hoof with rotation and separation that has been neglected for a while, that there is a wide white line separation, but the coffin bone is already well connected with the hoof wall again. And that's here the case. I don't know if it's well connected, but it is connected. But because this is not trimmed correctly, you still have a pretty wide white line. This should be trimmed like that. And then that horse would be much happier. So here is this horse with the incredible rotation again. He could, when we got him, he could not stand. He could not stand on the either front foot. Hind feet were kind of sort of okay. If I had to do it again, if I had then the knowledge that I have now, I would have first picked up the hind feet and really trimmed them super well. And start with this and leave the front alone. But I didn't. I trimmed the hind feet, but I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. I didn't get to these hind feet again for the next 6 weeks because he just couldn't stand on the fronts. And he was not one who cherished to be in the sling. He was too excited. This is a national show horse, a cross between an Arabian and a saddlebred. They are really very excitable. And this horse didn't like to be in the sling, so I couldn't get his feet up, his hind feet. I could get the front feet up. Another thing that I want to just share with you, because it comes to mind on this horse, I approached him. The first day was nothing. We took the shoes off. I trimmed the fronts. It took a couple of hours, but I got it done. He didn't stand very well. He really slammed the feet down a lot, and he was a hard trim. He was definitely one where I took a lot of homeopathic remedies at night after I was done with that. But then when I want to retrim him, I approached him again, and he was just a pill to pick the feet up. And I couldn't figure this out, and I didn't get it. So at that time we were still feeding in stalls. And I thought one morning, I'm just going to walk into the stall and trim him there, because maybe he stands on the rubber mat there better. This was before we got all the rubber everywhere. Let's try this. And I just stuck the knives into my back pocket and walked in with a rasp and gloves on. And he stood like a lamb. He was really good. And After I walked out, it dawned on me. This horse had been beaten so much by the farrier, he didn't like the apron. And when I approached him to trim him without an apron on, he was fine. So, just in case one of you cannot trim a horse, try to take the apron off. Sometimes this may help. I have seen this in one other horse where that didn't want to stand, and once I got the apron off, it was fine. So how does acute founder occur? It can happen through road founder when the horse really runs on a hard surface for a very long time. That can trigger, can be the trigger for founder. Toxins are a trigger. Any change in metabolism or blood chemistry. Poisons, toxic plants, incorrect nutrition. Excess protein, sudden changes in feed. We had talked about this in the nutrition lecture, how sudden changes in feed make a difference in the bacteria in the hindgut, and when they cannot handle it, you may see it as inflammation of the feet. Infections, rarely, but it happens. A hot nail in chewing could cause such an infection, or a puncture wound that goes all the way to the corium. Other pathogens in the body may also trigger infection in the hoof. A retained placenta is also an option to trigger a founder episode. Every time there is an insult to the entire system of the horse, the weakest link, in this case the compromised hoof, will show the most reaction. It then may look as if this insult was the cause for the founder, but this was a long time in the making. Steep hoofs, unphysiological pressure on the frontal lamellar corium, unnatural living all lead over time to a breakdown of the system. The trigger is just the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Should the acute trigger happen in a horse with correct hoof form, then the resulting laminitis is still very painful, but after some movement and a few very uncomfortable days, the healing process will begin and the horse is usually after a few weeks fully usable again. Or fully healed. I have a hard time, meanwhile, with this word usable. We don't have to use our horses, especially not if they are sick. So this was about everything I can think of at the moment about founder. And I want at the end here share with you a hoof that I looked at. This hoof, I pulled it out of the freezer. It was trimmed at some point, I don't know, during one of the many trim sessions we have here. And I looked at it and I thought, this looks like one of those hoofs where the people that follow the wild horse model, they really like a hoof like this. Short toe, thick wall. This really looks good. And I would like to take a stab in the dark here, and it's not quite so dark. And call on somebody and have them tell me what they see here in this hoof. Shira, how about you?
Yeah, I knew you were going to do that.
That's what you get for being a student.
Yeah, I know. I actually see a quite high heel. The hairline, and it may be because of the way how long the hair is. The hairline looks quite deceptive. It seems to start out at a nice angle, but towards the heel actually juts up a little bit. And the heel is actually looks deceptively low. I think it's actually quite high.
Okay.
And it does look like the hairline in the front dips a little bit, but it's kind of hard to tell.
Okay.
It also looks like on the top, I'm wondering if I ran my fingers over the top of the toe, if I wouldn't feel a slight dip there.
Okay.
I wanted the picture looks like there's actually a slight dip there. Um, just from this one view, that's kind of all I can see, although there's bruising in the quarter. Yep, right there, which would indicate something else going on as well.
Okay. That's it?
From this view, yeah.
Okay. You don't have to fish. It's good. That's good. Let me try one other person. Mary, do you have a microphone?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Sorry, the TV's on.
You're watching TV on the side?
Well, I have my headset on, my Bose headset, so
Okay.
my husband had, sorry. Is there insufficient toe height in this hook?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
That,
And I can see I noticed the bruising too, up over by the heel.
yeah. Okay. These were the two students that are on the call, so they get picked on. The others are just innocent bystanders. Thank you, Mary. You know, if the heel is too high or not is hard to tell because there is no proportion, there's no measurement. You know, I would have to have a measuring stick beside it in order to say really this is too high or not too high. But if the heel was, let's just assume the heel was the right height, was at 3 centimeters for a medium-sized horse, then maybe the toe is too low. This is another way to look at it. And you know, this anterior-posterior balance is really important. And in this case, it doesn't look as if this horse has enough toe height. It doesn't look to me as if it has enough toe height. But as I said, a lot of the wild horse trimmers that follow this wild horse hoof model may like this hoof very much. Now let's turn it around. And all the observations from Shira and Mary were very correct. What we have here is definite separation and rotation. And we also have a very thick hoof wall, which is nice to have that, but it doesn't help if the coffin bone isn't in its right position. And if we go back to this, if you have such a low profile on a hoof, you always have trouble on the inside in one way or another. For sure. You have a low profile, you have a hairline that dips in the front. Where it starts dipping is hard to tell here. Maybe it starts dipping already here. It could be that it is here going up. That's with all the hair and the fuzziness of the picture, not easy to tell. But when you have such a low profile, you have either a sinker, and this is what Shira says. She wonders if there isn't a indentation here, but in a sinker this indentation would be all around. Or you have rotation with separation. And this is actually not a sinker. Amazingly so. This horse has, for the separation he has, the coffin bone sits amazingly high in the hoof capsule. So, and I have no background information, but I just want to share this. And real quick, we're running out of time, want to share this one as well. Just because we have made these pictures at some point, and I meanwhile learned that you have to focus on the hoof and not on the hand. But the camera hasn't figured this out by itself. It needed a little bit help, and I couldn't give it to it at the time. So what we have here is a very underslung heel. We had talked about this, but we also have this profile again of dipping in the front. Even so, that picture is taken a little bit too far from the front, but you can see the stipping. And every time you see the stipping, you have something like that. You have separation without a shadow of a doubt. It doesn't go any other way. Why else would that hairline not go straight up and high? You could have a totally sunk horse and a low profile therefore. But in general, when you have the stip in the front, you have rotation. And we took these hoofs apart because I said that, and I had some students that didn't believe me. So I had to go to the bandsaw and saw them apart. So I want to share this with you just to give you something else to look at. And that concludes basically tonight's lecture. If you have any questions, please raise your hand or type them in the question box, and I'll be glad to give it a try and answer them. Yes, Shira.
I had a few questions.
Okay?
The first is, can you have a sinking coffin bone without rotation?
Yes, absolutely.
So I was wondering if you might talk a little bit, or maybe you're going to talk about this next week, about
Yes.
what you might do to help that horse.
Yes, we talk about sinkers in a separate lecture.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Okay, I just remembered my last question. Okay, if you go back to the slide of the founder where the heel looked very long and underneath, and there was a huge bulge on the toe. Keep going back. Keep going. That one.
Oops. That one? Yeah.
No, nope. The one
No.
before it. You just had it. That gray hoof that you just showed before. No. Go forwards again. Go forwards. Keep going. Keep going. One more. No. It was that gray hoof that you had just put your thing on. The hoof looks very low and very bulgy.
This one here?
That one. Oh, that one.
Oh, okay.
This, yes. I know. I was wondering about, some people say that if you actually do a resection on the top of the toe to give the coronary band room, to kind of cut that hoof wall away where it's really bulging up and pressing into the coronary band, that's helpful, and I was wondering what you thought about that.
That definitely destabilizes the hoof capsule in a way that I don't even want to think about, because a stable hoof capsule is still very important to me. And no, Mary, it's not coronary grooving. It is actually taking, let me go to that picture to this picture. It is when you take actually everything out here. That's what you're talking about, Shira, yes?
Yeah, they didn't, this person was not talking about taking absolutely everything. She was just talking about the very top of the bulge where it presses into the coronet.
Well, that's coronary grooving. And
I've never heard of it.
that's ugly, because what happens is if you have a hoof here like this, and now you rasp this here and make a cut basically here, and you don't take the heel down and you don't bring this back into balance, what happens is as the front here is still overloaded, it starts caving in like this. And
now, what if you rasp it away, but you also take away the heel and bring the rest into balance?
I don't know. It still unbalances the hoof capsule, and I don't know that this would help anything. How does this bring the coffin bone back in balance?
I think she did it not to bring the coffin bone back in balance, but to relieve the pressure on the coronet.
Yeah? And did it
From
help?
She says it did.
Okay.
She sent me pictures of this case.
Why
And I've
don't,
never,
can
I
I
want to
see
get
those?
I can send them to you, sure.
Yeah, that would be great. You know, I'm not saying that we have the answer to everything, but I have nobody in the barefoot world that I kind of take serious has done any grooving. Quite to the contrary, no grooving. So,
What? Sorry, just another question on that.
yeah?
Um, what what are resections supposed to do? Like when farriers do resections for founder cases, I don't understand what the purpose is.
I don't either.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. You know, and I never know what other people think when they are doing something unless they have shared with me or with one of my teachers what they were thinking.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I don't know what they think when they do something. Maybe it is they wanna relieve some pressure, but I don't know that how this actually works. You know, this is the same. We can go over this for hours. Over does it really help to cut the tendon?
Right.
Those people who cut tendons say yes, it helps. It makes the hair rise on my back, if I even think about it. And it's not necessary. So why grooving is not necessary either. And there are some on the Natural Horse Trim website, some pictures of Yvonne Wells's horse Indy that was grooved and the corium prolapsed, and it's really ugly. And I don't think it's necessary at all. So, but I would like to see the pictures. Maybe I can learn something.
I'm sending them to you right now. I'll be interested to see what you think.
Okay, thank you. Was that it?
Yep, that was it. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Pia.
Hi, I have two things. First, I wanted to thank you for showing that series of pictures where the white line is, the white line is tight, but you still have the rotation. I don't know if Hardy's on the call, but the last time I was at his place, I have one client at his place who, the horse, if you look at her hoof, I think it's her right front hoof. If you look at it from the front, she is higher on the outside, lower on the inside, but she also does not have enough toe height. So, I'm sort of taking one thing at a time with respect to this. But when we were looking at the hoof, the medial wall looks flared, and when you pick up the hoof, the white line is tight, but towards the coronet band, the wall is tighter, and towards the bottom of the hoof it's flared out. And I suspected that she probably has some rotation toward the medial wall, and this presentation just kind of confirmed it for me. And that would also be why she's high on the outside, but I really can't lower it because she doesn't yet have enough overall toe height. And she's very flat on the soles, so she's probably sunk as well.
Better you than me.
Well, she's sound. I don't know, she's a draft cross. She's very comfortable.
Good. But maybe
so anyway, we'll go ahead.
Maybe if her feet were right, she could fly.
Yeah, I think so.
Who knows?
So anyway, that's very interesting because it helps when you see something strange like that.
Yeah.
To have some reference. And then my second thing is a question. I don't know if I can describe this accurately, but have you ever seen say if you're looking at the frontal toe wall, right in the right dead center in the front of the hoof, it's kind of flat or even indented, rather than kind of rounded. Do you know what I'm saying? Say from...
When you look from the top, when you look at
Yeah,
the
or-
coronet band from the top, the front is flat.
Well, not even like the hoof wall is growing out so that it's flat across the front of the wall.
So
And instead of
Try.
kind of rounded and
instead
smooth
of this, it looks like this.
something like that.
Okay.
You would have the corners at the bottom may be a little bit more towards the center, but yeah, something like that. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is the horse dragging the toe?
No, well, now it's growing out. I mean, my guess was that maybe the horse was rotated, wasn't getting enough circulation in the front there, but it started from the coronet band. When I saw the horse today, it looks like the new growth is starting to...
Or the horse has had high heels or heel pain. It doesn't need to have high heels in order to have high heel pain. And had heel pain and was dragging the foot, and
No.
No? Okay.
Mm-mm. When I started trimming, two of the horses have it. Two of the three horses have it, and when I started trimming them, they had extra long toes, which is why I thought. Well, I don't know. I mean, it was very. I've never seen this before, but they both had long, extremely long toes, and stretching of the white line at the toe, and then it's just flat there across the front.
I have no answer to your question, but I have a story to tell that Brian Hansen told in that seminar that I went to in Washington, and they were looking at the Brumbies' feet, and some of them had square toes. And so they didn't quite want to listen to the natives, to the Aborigines, who just told them, "Oh, there's crocodiles in the water," and it's not something that when the Aborigines talk, they couldn't understand them quite well. So, but they thought they understood there were crocodiles in the water. And they did their own research. And by golly, there were crocodiles in the water. But they didn't nip the toes off. The horses stayed far back from the water hole and dug like crazy in order to get to water. Till they had dug down to the water table, and therefore their toes were squared.
Yeah.
That's all that comes to mind. I have no answer
Yeah. Well,
for
I
you.
guess I get that at the edge of the bottom of the hoof, but this grows down from the corner.
This
band
grows all the
like
way
that.
From the
Yeah.
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 And I just thought maybe it would be probably some sort of circulation issue, or, I have no idea. I'll let you know if-
Solution number 1: send picture.
Yeah, it's hard to capture it. I
Okay.
tried.
Solution number 2: tell Claudia when you go there, and she goes with you.
Okay.
I'm always up for adventures. If
All
I have
right.
the time, I come with you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
you.
Here. And Sandy, you want to contribute something?
Am I unmuted now?
You are now unmuted.
And can you hear me? You can hear me.
Yeah.
I know what she's talking about with the square toe, but that's not what I was going to ask about. I was going to ask, you mentioned casting and this is obviously something that wasn't in the SHP material, and it is something that several people have talked about, casting, putting a cast on the horse's foot when they've got severe founder and the dropped coffin bone. Have you actually had some experience with that, and does it do what you want it to do?
I have looked at this intensively. I have some casts here. I have worked a little bit with casts. I didn't have any dropped coffin bones since. I think it definitely has a value but you have to kind of practice, and I want to say you have to do 10 casts on cadavers before you cast a live horse. It is really, it looks a hell of a lot easier than it is. And this whole casting, you know, Pete Ramey actually has a very good DVD, tool DVD out about this. I don't remember what it's named, but it's a short DVD about where he talks about tools and he talks about casting and he explains it in great detail. And what it does is you put the cast around the bottom of the hoof and at the same time incorporate a very soft pad. And that actually helps the whole hoof to stay together. It supports the coffin bone from below. And then what you can do with this cast is you can keep the heel low because you actually can rasp that cast. It gets as hard as a hoof capsule. What it does not allow is hoof mechanism, because it really gets
you don't want
this.
that much, right?
Yeah, but in a sunk horse you don't want that much, you know,
Yeah, I
or
was
maybe
thinking
nothing.
You don't want that much.
So you may have to play around with this a little bit, but it's definitely an option in one way or another. And I have to work with this a whole lot more, and without having a horse that needs it, it's kind of mute to just do one of mine that don't have sunk coffin bones.
Well, it seems too, though, that with a chronic founder, when they have so much laminar wedge, that the cast is just adding an extra layer.
Yeah, with chronic founder, that's not the answer. I don't think that's the answer. It's just for sinkers. By the way, Mary just told me via typing, the CD set is named Tools of the Trade, $50, well invested. That is, I personally think that's the best DVD that Pete has made. He talks about sharpening nippers. There's a flaw in that, but that's beside the point. So, okay, thank you for throwing this in, but I personally have really looked into it. I've also had the inventor of the cast, supposedly the inventor, Richard Davis, here, Dave Richards, so that's the name. It was a long day. I had him here for a day, and he showed me, he actually casted one of my horses, and after 2 weeks I took the cast off because he was so lame. But it was it was the wrong application for that foot.
Well, I do know one person, a friend of mine, Cricket Gentry, she used a cast on one of her horses. And I think that same fellow you're mentioning, because I thought she said that he invented it, that he put it on that horse, but she said it didn't help her horse.
Well,
either,
it really depends what it is. You would have to have radiographs before and then 6 months after and see if it really helped. And you should know what you're doing. Casey LaPierre, Mary says, has a similar product. Casey LaPierre has a lot of similar products that other people have invented. He's famous for that. People have invented colloidal silver, and all of a sudden Casey LaPierre comes out with a product that's exclusively his, and it's basically colloidal silver. So, but that's okay. Everybody does the best what he can in this world. Thank you, Sandy. Shira, you have another question or comment?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the casting. I actually wound up doing that to my thoroughbred this summer, and I figured since the question was asked, I would just, if you have the time, let you know the results really quickly. I believe RJ, I've never gotten him x-rayed. I do believe he was a sinker. And he had a very bad laminitis episode at the beginning of the summer due to a trimming mistake on my part that introduced too much hoof mechanism in his front feet. And about a month and a half later, I called up my friend Frank, who is also a trimmer and has done the casting, and asked him to come up and cast RJ. Pretty much a week after RJ was casted, I moved to New Hampshire and didn't see him for 6 weeks. When I did see him, he was still pretty ouchy, but the hooves had grown in a very different way than they had in the 5 years previously. He'd actually grown some heel. There was much more solar growth than I've ever seen him produce. And 6 weeks later, I brought him to New Hampshire. He is completely sound, with very interesting growth again inside the sole that Claudia, I actually took pictures today, and at some point I'd love to talk to you about them and show you what the pictures. But for him, I can only say that the casting actually really helped.
Yeah.
It reduced the hoof mechanism enough that the lamina could become uninflamed again.
Right.
And yet allowed enough growth of the sole to protect his foot finally. And he feels better than he has in years. He was cantering today. I've not seen him do that.
Yeah.
Ever so nicely.
Yeah, and I'm not against it. I just say I don't have enough experience with it.
Right, no, I think he was actually the perfect horse to do it on.
Mm-hmm.
His particular case of just recurring chronic laminitis, kind of no matter what I did, where I just had to do something to arrest the hoof mechanism and allow the hoof to actually grow enough that it wouldn't overflex and keep irritating the lamina.
Well, if you have a lot of hoof mechanism and you have a lot of inflammation and you can't walk it out of the horse because as soon as the horse moves, it inflames again, you kind of have a vicious cycle there that you can't break. And if
the cast helped to break it.
yeah, no, I hear you. This is good. So I think we will look into this more and explore this more and really try to figure out how to do this, and that is going more into continuing education than into basic education in trimming, but we always can explore things like this on a individual basis. Okay?
I just figured I'd let you know since the question was just
Yeah,
asked.
no, absolutely. Thank you, Shira.
Yeah.
Nobody else? If that's it, then I hope you have a good day in Australia and a good night around here, or a good rest of the evening, and I will see you next week when we talk about what actually to do about founders, and we will explore this some more, how to practically work on this, and I think we talk about sinkers and all that too. Thank you for coming, and goodbye.